Sweat soaked through my father's designer suit as he fidgeted under the fluorescent lights of the glass-walled boardroom. For 6 long years, he and my mother had made sure everyone in our hometown knew I was nothing but a worthless dropout. Yet here he was, desperately pleading with a billionaire CEO for a bailout to avoid a prison sentence, completely unaware that the person holding his fate was the very child he had discarded. In the affluent, manicured suburbs of Oak Brook, Illinois, image wasn't just everything. It was the only thing. My parents, Rickard and Beverly Hughes, were the undisputed king and queen of our local country club elite. My father ran a highly visible, incredibly lucrative commercial real estate development firm. My mother was a professional socialite, serving on every charity board that could guarantee her a photo in the local lifestyle magazines. They had a strict blueprint for their children: Ivy League education, a high society marriage, and a career that sounded impressive at cocktail parties. My older sister Zoe followed the blueprint flawlessly. She was a former pageant queen who went to Yale, majored in art history, and promptly got engaged to Preston Sterling, a guy whose family literally had a hospital wing named after them. Then, there was me. Clara. I was supposed to be the corporate lawyer. I got into Northwestern law, which appeased my parents enough to brag about me, but 2 semesters in, I realized I was suffocating. I didn't want to argue over corporate tax loopholes. I wanted to build something. I had been working on a supply chain logistics software on the side with a brilliant coder named Simon, whom I met in a coffee shop. We had a working prototype that could optimize freight routes and save shipping companies millions. When I told my parents I was dropping out of law school to pursue a tech startup, the reaction wasn't just disappointment, it was nuclear. "You're throwing away a prestigious career to play on computers with some nobody?" my father bellowed, his face turning an alarming shade of plum red. We were standing in the middle of our foyer, the crystal chandelier casting harsh light on the furious tears in my mother's eyes. "Clara, how could you do this to us?" Beverly sobbed, clutching her pearls. Literally. "The country club gala is next week. What on earth am I supposed to tell Brenda Carmichael? Her daughter just made partner at a firm in Chicago. And my daughter is, what? A dropout trying to be a glorified mailman." I tried to explain the software, the projected margins, the scalability. They didn't care. To them, startup meant unemployed. "If you walk out that door to do this, you are cut off," my father warned, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "No trust fund, no rent assistance, no safety net. You will see what it actually means to be a failure." I walked out. I thought they just needed time. I was wrong. The real betrayal happened 8 months later at our annual family Thanksgiving dinner. Simon and I were struggling. We had burned through our meager savings, and I was waitressing night shifts at a diner just to keep the servers running. I arrived at my parents' house, exhausted, wearing a dress from 3 seasons ago, desperately hoping for a warm meal and maybe a shred of familial warmth. The dining room was packed with extended family: Uncle Dave, Aunt Susan, my cousins. As we sat down, Aunt Susan, whose primary currency was gossip, leaned across the table. "So, Clara, darling, your mother tells me you're taking time to find yourself. Still haven't found a real job yet?" I froze. I looked at my mother, who was deliberately sipping her Pinot Noir, avoiding my gaze. "I'm running my own company, Aunt Susan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're in the seed funding stage." "Oh, let's not bore everyone with your little hobbies, Clara," my mother interrupted, her tone dripping with saccharine condescension. She turned to the rest of the table, offering a martyred sigh. We've accepted that Clara just lacks the drive her sister has. Speaking of drive, Zoe, show everyone the ring." The entire table erupted as Zoe flashed a diamond the size of a marble. Preston, her fiancé, sat beside her looking smug. For the rest of the night, I was invisible. When I wasn't invisible, I was the punchline. Uncle Dave made jokes about me living in a cardboard box. My father loudly discussed how he was writing me out of the family trust to ensure the money went to someone who understood its value. I left before dessert. As I was walking down the driveway to my beat-up Honda Civic, Zoe followed me out. I thought she was coming to comfort me. Instead, she crossed her arms, shivering in the November air. "You're really embarrassing Mum and Dad, you know," she said smoothly. "Just give it up, Clara. You're never going to be a CTOO. You're making yourself look pathetic. And frankly, it's casting a shadow over my wedding season. Just get a job as a paralegal or something." I looked at my perfect sister in her cashmere sweater and felt something inside me snap. A cold, hardened resolve took the place of my grief. "Have a great wedding, Zoe," I said. I got in my car and drove away. I changed my phone number the next day. I blocked them on all social media. If I was a failure, a ghost, a black sheep, fine. I would haunt them from the shadows. The next 4 years were a blur of absolute hell and glorious, terrifying momentum. Simon and I didn't just build a company, we built an empire. It turned out, our logistics software, which we officially named Aegis Routing, was the exact missing link a major global shipping conglomerate was looking for. We didn't just get seed funding, we were bought out for a 40% stake by a massive venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. Overnight, my net worth skyrocketed into the 9 figures. But I had learned my lesson about the destructive nature of ego and flashiness. I bought a beautiful but discreet penthouse in downtown Chicago. I wore tailored, unbranded clothes. I kept my name out of the flashy Forbes 30 under 30 lists, letting Simon handle the public-facing tech press while I operated as the silent, ruthless architect of our expansion. I formed a holding company, Osprey Financial, to manage my new wealth and make strategic acquisitions. To the world, Clara Hughes was a ghost. To the boardrooms of corporate America, I was a titan. While my star was silently rising, the Hughes family empire was loudly and spectacularly imploding. I kept tabs on them through a fake social media account. It started subtly. My mother's constant posts about lavish European vacations dwindled, replaced by aggressive defensive posts about family loyalty and staying strong through trials. Then, the news hit the financial papers. Preston Sterling, Zoe's perfect blue-blooded husband, wasn't a genius investor. He was running a sophisticated cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme. When the crypto market crashed, his investors demanded their money. Preston didn't have it. But it got worse. The feds raided Preston's offices, and the trail of money led straight to my father. Rickard Hughes, desperate to keep up the appearance of limitless wealth and to fund my mother's extravagant lifestyle during a real estate downturn, had quietly borrowed millions from Preston's fund to float his failing development projects. When Preston went down, he dragged my father with him. Hughes' development was bleeding out. My father was facing not just bankruptcy, but potential criminal charges for wire fraud if he couldn't pay back the massive, glaring deficit in his company's accounts. Banks blacklisted him. His country club friends, the same people who used to laugh at my expense, completely ostracized him. The Hughes family was drowning, and the water was rising fast. I watched it all happen from my penthouse, sipping black coffee. I felt no joy, just a profound, clinical fascination. The universe was delivering hard karma, and it was devastatingly thorough. Then, an opportunity presented itself, one so perfectly poetic I couldn't ignore it. My lead acquisitions manager at Osprey Financial, a sharp-suited shark named Marcus Thorne, let's call him Dalen Kensington, walked into my office. "Clara," Dalen said, dropping a thick dossier on my desk, "we have a distressed asset looking for a quiet, immediate buyout, commercial real estate. The portfolio has decent bones, but the current CEO over-leveraged himself to the point of absurdity. He's looking for a lifeline, needs a $25 million cash injection immediately, willing to surrender 80% equity and all voting rights just to avoid federal prison." I opened the dossier. Staring back at me was the logo of Hughes Development. My heart skipped a beat, then settled into a slow, heavy rhythm. My father had no idea who owned Osprey Financial. To him, we were just a faceless, ruthless private equity firm in Chicago. "He's begging, Clara," Dalen noted, watching my face. "His broker is calling me 3 times a day. If we don't buy him out by Friday, the feds freeze his assets and he's done." I traced my finger over my father's signature on the preliminary documents. "Set up a meeting," I said softly. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Tell the broker that the CEO of Osprey will be there personally to finalize the terms." "And Dalen?" "Yes, boss." "Tell him to bring his wife and his daughter. Tell him Osprey requires the family trust signatories to be present to absolve the liens." Dalen looked confused but nodded. "Understood." The next morning, the boardroom of Osprey Financial was polished to a mirror shine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, a testament to power and control. I wore a tailored charcoal Alexander McQueen suit, my hair pulled back in a sleek, unforgiving bun. At 9:55 a.m., the double doors opened. My father walked in first. The last time I saw him, he was a giant, bellowing at me in our foyer. Now he looked 10 years older, his shoulders slumped, his custom suit hanging loosely on a frame that had lost weight from stress. My mother followed, her usual haughty demeanor replaced by a fragile, frantic, nervous energy. She clutched a designer handbag like a life preserver. Finally, Zoe walked in. She looked exhausted, the sparkle of her pageant days entirely extinguished by the reality of her husband's impending prison sentence. They didn't look up immediately. They were too busy being intimidated by the room, the view, the sheer capitalistic weight of the environment. Dalen Kensington gestured to the head of the table. "Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, our CEO will be with you in a moment to review the terms of your surrender." "Thank you," my father said, his voice a raspy whisper of defeat. "We are very grateful for this opportunity. Truly." I was standing by the window, my back to them, looking out at the city. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the ghosts of my past settle. "You should be grateful, Rickard," I said. My father froze. My mother gasped. Zoe's head snapped up. I turned around slowly, stepping into the light of the boardroom. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, deafening, and thicker than concrete. My father's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. His eyes darted from my face to Dalen and back to me. Clara?" he stammered, the color draining completely from his face. "Hello, Dad," I said, walking to the head of the table and sitting in the leather chair reserved for the master of the house. "Mum, Zoe, please take a seat. We have a lot of debt to discuss." The silence in the boardroom stretched so thin it felt like a piano wire ready to snap. My father, Rickard Hughes, a man who had spent his entire life commanding rooms and bulldozing his opposition, literally gripped the edge of the mahogany table to keep his hands from shaking. His eyes darted around, desperately searching for a hidden camera, a punchline, anything to explain away the impossible reality sitting in front of him. "Clara," he whispered again, the word catching in his dry throat. You are the CEO of Osprey Financial?" I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. "I am the founder, the CEO, and the majority shareholder." "Yes." My mother, Beverly, was the first to attempt a pivot. It was a spectacular, sickening display of cognitive dissonance. The panic on her face instantly melted into a grotesque, forced mask of maternal pride. "Oh, my darling girl," she cried out, taking a sudden step toward the head of the table, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. "I knew it. Rickard, didn't I always say Clara was just finding her path? We are so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart. To think our own daughter is going to save the family business." I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just stared at her until her fake, trembling smile faltered, and she slowly lowered her hands, shrinking back into her seat. "Let's skip the revisionist history, Beverly," I said, my voice dangerously calm. 6 years ago, you stood in a foyer and told me I was a failure. At Thanksgiving, you laughed while your husband announced he was cutting me out of a will that is now, ironically, entirely worthless. So let's be professionals today. You aren't my parents right now, and I am not your daughter. You are a distressed asset, and I am the only lifeline keeping you out of federal prison." My father flinched as if I had struck him. He looked down at the meticulously prepared dossier Dalen had placed in front of him. "Clara, please," my father pleaded, his voice cracking. The arrogance that had defined his entire existence was entirely gone. We made mistakes. I see that now. But you can't be entirely cold to us. This is your legacy too. Whose development is our family name. Your family name is currently implicated in a federal wire fraud investigation. I corrected him smoothly. I gestured for Dalen to hand out the updated contracts. "Let's review the terms of the bailout." Dalen distributed the thick, legally binding documents. I watched my sister, Zoe, flip open the first page. Her hands were shaking so badly she tore the edge of the paper. Osprey Financial is prepared to inject $25 million of liquid capital into Hughes Development by close of business tomorrow, I stated, reciting the terms from memory. This will cover the illegal deficit you pulled from Preston's fraudulent fund, satisfying the federal investigators and keeping you, Rickard, from being indicted. My father let out a massive, ragged sigh of relief, dropping his head into his hands. "Thank God. Clara, thank you. You have no idea what this means. I'll make you a full partner. We'll rebrand. Hughes and daughter—" "I am not finished," I interrupted, the temperature in the room dropping 10 degrees. My father froze, looking up slowly. In exchange for the $25 million, Osprey Financial assumes 85% equity of Hughes Development. You will surrender all voting rights, all board seats, and all executive control. You, Rickard, are stepping down as CEO immediately. 85%, my father choked out, his face turning an ashen grey. "Clara, that's a hostile takeover. That's a slaughter. You're leaving me with nothing but a minority phantom share." "I am leaving you with your freedom," I countered, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the table, "which is significantly more than you deserve. Furthermore, Osprey is liquidating the entire commercial portfolio to absorb the debt. Hughes Development, as an operating entity, will be dissolved entirely by the end of the fiscal year." "Dissolved?" my mother shrieked, the country club facade finally cracking completely. "Rickard's business. But what about our income? What about our standing? Clara, you can't destroy our entire lives just to prove a point." "I'm not destroying it to prove a point, Mom. I'm destroying it because it's a terrible, failing business model propped up by debt and ego, I said flatly. You will receive a small, fixed monthly stipend from the remaining 15% share dividends. It will be enough to cover a modest 2-bedroom apartment and basic utilities. Nothing more. Suddenly, Zoe slammed her hands on the table. Tears were streaming down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her makeup. "What about Preston?" she sobbed, glaring at me with a mixture of raw desperation and lingering entitlement. "Clara, the feds are freezing our personal accounts. Preston is looking at 10 years in minimum security. You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You need to pay his legal fees. You have to." I looked at my older sister. I remembered her standing in the driveway, wrapped in cashmere, telling me I was pathetic and casting a shadow over her wedding season. "I am buying distressed commercial real estate, Zoe," I said softly. "I am not funding federal defense lawyers for Ponzi scheme architects. Preston is going to prison, and frankly, you should start looking for employment. I hear the local paralegal firms are hiring." Zoe let out a gut-wrenching wail and buried her face in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. My mother rushed to comfort her, shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are a monster," Beverly hissed. "We gave you everything. We raised you. And you sit there like a sociopath, torturing your own blood." "You raised a blueprint, not a daughter," I replied, standing up from my chair and buttoning my suit jacket. "And when I deviated from your blueprint, you threw me away. You told me I would see what it actually meant to be a failure." I gestured to the sprawling, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline behind me, then down to the contracts on the table. "Well, here we are." I looked at my father. He was staring blankly at the signature line on the last page. He looked entirely hollowed out, a man who had suddenly realized that the foundation of his entire life was made of sand, and the tide had just rolled in. "Sign the papers, Rickard," I said, "or Dalen will call your broker, rescind the offer, and let the FBI knock down your door tomorrow morning. You have exactly 2 minutes to decide." There was no more bargaining. There was no more pride. With trembling fingers, my father picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen, a gift from my mother for their 20th anniversary, and signed away his empire, his legacy, and his pride. Dalen efficiently collected the folders. "Thank you, Mr. Hughes. The funds will be wired to the escrow account by 9 a.m. I didn't say goodbye. I simply turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving them sitting in the ruins of their own making. The corporate execution of Hughes' development was swift, clinical, and completely devoid of sentimentality. Within 30 days, Osprey Financial had gutted the bloated executive suite. I personally fired every single one of my father's golf buddy board members. We sold off the half-finished commercial lots to aggressive competitors at a discount, stripping the company down to its studs to neutralize the toxic debt. The gossip in Oakbrook was biblical. Aunt Susan, who had so gleefully mocked me at Thanksgiving years prior, became the unwilling town crier of the Hughes family's spectacular downfall. But she didn't know I was the architect. To the country club set, a ruthless, faceless private equity firm from the city had simply swallowed Rickard whole. But the real, hard karma hit exactly where it hurt my parents the most, their image. Because of the massive personal liens Preston had dragged my father into, the family trust was entirely wiped out. The massive, pillared mansion in Oakbrook went into foreclosure. The country club, citing moral turpitude due to the federal investigation, quietly revoked my parents' membership. 6 months after the boardroom meeting, I received a report from Dalen Kensington detailing their new living situation. My parents had moved into a 1,200-square-foot, two-bedroom condo in Naperville. It was perfectly functional, but to Beverly Hughes, it might as well have been a cardboard box under a bridge. The woman who used to host 300-plate charity galas was now driving a 10-year-old Toyota sedan and clipping coupons for the local grocery store. Zoe's fate was a different kind of tragedy. Preston was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy. With her assets frozen and her reputation in the elite circles completely toxic, her Ivy League art history degree proved entirely useless. She was forced to swallow her immense pride and take a job as a front desk receptionist at a pediatric dental clinic just to afford rent for a studio apartment near the courthouse. Occasionally, I would get emails from them. At first, they were angry. My mother would send vitriolic messages accusing me of destroying the family, demanding I release more funds from their stolen company. I set an autofilter to send them directly to an archive folder. Then, the tone changed to desperation. My father emailed me once, asking if I had any entry-level consulting work at Osprey. "Clara, I just need to get out of the house. Your mother and I are at each other's throats. I know the commercial market, inside and out. Just give me a desk in a corner." I didn't reply. I had learned early on that you cannot negotiate with a cancer. You can only cut it out and heal. People often think that revenge stories end with a triumphant high, a popping of champagne, and a feeling of immense joy. But real life doesn't work like a movie. There was no joy in watching my family break apart. There was no euphoric high in seeing my father humiliated or my sister reduced to answering phones for a dentist. Instead, what I felt was an overwhelming, profound sense of quiet. For 22 years, my brain had been incredibly noisy, filled with the constant, grinding anxiety of trying to be perfect, trying to earn their love, trying to avoid their devastating judgment. When I sat in my penthouse overlooking the city at night, drinking tea and reviewing the quarterly projections for Aegis routing with Simon, I realized the noise was finally gone. I had saved them from prison. I had ensured they wouldn't starve. I set up an irrevocable trust that paid their rent and basic utilities directly, so they could never become homeless. I fulfilled my basic, biological obligation to the people who gave me life. But I didn't owe them my soul, and I didn't owe them my success. 2 years after the buyout, I was invited to speak at a massive tech summit in San Francisco. It was my first major public appearance since stepping out of the shadows. I stood on a stage in front of 3,000 ambitious, terrified, brilliant young entrepreneurs. During the Q&A, a young woman in the front row stood up. She looked nervous, clutching her microphone. "Ms. Hughes, you built $1 billion logistics empire from scratch. But the tech world is so volatile, and the risk of failure is so high. How do you deal with the fear of becoming a failure?" I smiled, thinking of my mother's pearls, my father's red face, and the cold boardroom where I bought my freedom. "You have to redefine what failure means," I told the crowd, my voice echoing through the massive auditorium. "Some people will tell you that failure is losing your status, or dropping out of the expected path, or disappointing the people who demand you fit into their mold. But that's not failure. That's just liberation disguised as disappointment." I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "True failure," I continued, "is spending your entire life building an empire on lies and ego, only to realize that when it all collapses, the people you threw away were the only ones who could have saved you. So don't fear their definition of failure. Build your own definition of success, and make it so unshakable so completely undeniable that one day they have no choice but to sit at your table and play by your rules. The applause was deafening, but for the first time in my life, I didn't need the applause to know my worth. I stepped off the stage, walked out of the auditorium, and went back to work. And that is how I bought my family's empire and my own freedom. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying people, it's simply letting them destroy themselves while you thrive in the shadows. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have saved them or let them fall? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe for more.